Montana Territory, 1878. Elijah Irving stared at the charred remains of his ranch house, watching as the last embers danced against the darkening sky. 3 days since the fire had claimed everything: his home, his livelihood, his family photographs. All that remained was his horse, Maverick, the clothes on his back, and the crushing weight of solitude that pressed down on his 25-year-old shoulders. "Nothing worth saving," he muttered, kicking at the blackened timber. The wind whistled through the burnt skeleton of what had once been his dream. 5 years of backbreaking work reduced to ash and memory. His father had warned him before he left Tennessee. "The frontier ain't built for dreamers, son. It'll chew you up and spit you out." Elijah had laughed then, young and full of ambition at 20. Now, with calloused hands and a hardened heart, he knew his father spoke truth. The Montana Territory had taken everything he'd built and reminded him of the one lesson he should have learned long ago: a man stands alone in this world. Attachment was a luxury, and love was a fairy tale told to children back east who had never faced the unforgiving reality of the frontier. Elijah mounted Maverick, casting one final glance at the ruins. "No point in staying, boy. Nothing here but ghosts now." The strawberry roan huffed in response, sensing his rider's desolation. He would head west, maybe try his luck in the Washington Territory. The thought brought no comfort, just a dull acceptance. This was the way of things. A man survived until he didn't. He built and nature destroyed. He loved and death took. Better to expect nothing and feel nothing. As he rode away, Elijah made a silent vow. He would never again put down roots deep enough to hurt when they were torn away. The West was no place for love. It was a place for survival, nothing more. 2 weeks of hard riding brought Elijah to a small settlement called Whispering Pines, nestled in a valley between towering mountains. It was little more than a collection of buildings: a general store, a saloon, a small church, and scattered homesteads. Perfect for a man looking to be forgotten. The Silver Dollar Saloon offered temporary respite from the autumn chill. Elijah ordered whiskey, ignoring the curious glances from the locals. A new face always drew attention in places like this. Passing through or staying, the bartender, a burly man with a gray-streaked beard, slid a glass across the worn counter. "Just passing," Elijah replied, though he had no destination in mind. "Looking for work?" "Might try the Zimmerman place," the bartender suggested, nodding toward the window. "Old man died last winter. Daughter's been trying to keep the place running. Ranch is about 5 miles north." Elijah nodded without commitment. He wasn't looking for complications, just enough work to earn traveling money. As dusk fell, he secured a room above the saloon and stepped onto the small balcony, surveying the quiet town. Lanterns flickered in windows as families gathered for supper. The sight brought an unwelcome pang of longing that he quickly smothered with another swig of whiskey. From his vantage point, something caught his eye: movement on the edge of town, near the cemetery on the hill. A figure in white moved between the headstones, seemingly floating in the gathering darkness. Curious despite himself, Elijah watched as the figure laid flowers on a grave, then stood motionless as if in prayer. "That's Willow Zimmerman," a voice said from behind. The bartender had come to deliver extra blankets. "Goes there every evening, rain or shine." "The woman who needs ranch help." The bartender nodded. "She's trying to hang onto that place something fierce. Stubborn as her daddy was, 22 years old and facing the world alone." Elijah turned back to the cemetery, but the figure in white had vanished into the dusk, like a spirit returned to the other world. Something about the lone figure stirred something in him, recognition perhaps. He knew what it was to stand alone against the gathering dark. "I will check on that ranch tomorrow," he said quietly, more to himself than to the bartender. Dawn broke cold and clear over Whispering Pines. Elijah rode north, following the directions to the Zimmerman Ranch. The property came into view gradually: a modest 2-story house, a large barn, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed. It had good bones, as his father would have said, but showed signs of neglect. Fence posts leaned at precarious angles, and the barn roof sagged dangerously on one side. As he approached the house, the door opened. The woman who stepped onto the porch stole his breath away. Willow Zimmerman stood tall and straight, her honey-blonde hair swept up in a practical knot at the nape of her neck. Her blue calico dress was simple but neat, the skirt dusted with flour. At 22, her face held both youth and determination, with high cheekbones and clear blue eyes that regarded him with cautious interest. "Can I help you?" her voice carried across the yard, strong and clear. Elijah removed his hat. "Heard you might be looking for help around the ranch." She studied him for a long moment. "Are you any good with cattle?" "Raised them since I was old enough to sit a horse," he replied honestly. "And why are you looking for work here? Whispering Pines isn't exactly on the main trail." The directness of her question caught him off guard. "I'm passing through, need to earn enough to keep moving." Something flickered across her face, disappointment perhaps. "I need someone who will stay. Winter's coming and I cannot manage this place alone, but I cannot afford to train someone new every few weeks." Elijah hesitated. Staying wasn't in his plans. Staying meant risking attachment, and attachment meant eventual pain. But something about the stubborn tilt of her chin and the quiet desperation hiding behind her composed expression made him reconsider. "I can stay through winter," he found himself saying. "After that, we can renegotiate." Relief washed over her features before she composed herself again. "The pay isn't much. Room and board plus $15 a month." "That's fair," he nodded. "There's a cabin behind the barn. It needs cleaning, but it's solid." She gestured toward a small structure. "I serve breakfast at 6 and supper at 7. Midday meal depends on the work." "Miss Zimmerman." "Willow," she corrected. "If you're staying through winter, we might as well use our given names, and yours is." Elijah Irving." "Well, Elijah Irving, there's stew on the stove. Get your things settled and come eat. We start work at first light tomorrow." With that, she turned and disappeared into the house, leaving Elijah with the distinct impression that a tornado had just passed by, rearranging his carefully constructed plans for solitude. The cabin was dusty but sound, with a small stove for heat and a bed that would fit his tall frame. After settling Maverick in the barn alongside a few other horses, Elijah washed up at the pump and made his way to the main house. Dinner was a quiet affair. Willow was polite but reserved, asking practical questions about his experience with ranching but offering little about herself. The stew was good, hearty with chunks of venison and potato, the bread freshly baked. "Your cooking's mighty fine," he offered, breaking a lengthy silence. "My mother taught me. She died when I was 16. Willow's tone was matter-of-fact, but her eyes reflected old grief. "Father never quite recovered. He let things slide these past few years." "I'm sorry about your parents." She shrugged slightly. "Life on the frontier, nothing is promised." She looked at him directly. "And you, any family?" The question pricked at his carefully constructed walls. "Not anymore." Something in his tone must have communicated his reluctance to elaborate, for she simply nodded and began clearing the dishes. "You mentioned seeing to the north pasture tomorrow," he said, changing the subject. "Yes, the fence is failing and we've lost 3 calves to wolves in the past month, with winter coming." "We'll fix it," Elijah promised. "First thing tomorrow." Later, as he walked back to his cabin under a blanket of stars, Elijah caught sight of Willow leaving the house, lantern in hand. She wore a white shawl over her shoulders that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Like a ghost, she moved across the property toward a small rise where 3 wooden crosses stood silhouetted against the night sky. Elijah watched as she placed her lantern beside the middle cross and knelt in prayer. The sight stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. He recognized the ritual of grief, having performed it himself over fresh graves back in Montana. Turning away to give her privacy, Elijah entered his cabin and prepared for bed. As he lay in the darkness, he reminded himself firmly of his resolution. He was here to work, to earn money, to move on when spring came. Nothing more. Attachment to this place or its determined young owner would only lead to pain when the time came to leave. The frontier had no patience for dreamers or for love. It was foolish to forget that lesson, no matter how compelling the teacher. Dawn arrived with frost glazing the windows of Elijah's cabin. True to her word, Willow had breakfast waiting when he entered the kitchen, eggs, bacon, and biscuits still warm from the oven. "The wolves hit the northwest corner again last night," she announced without preamble. "We lost another calf." Elijah nodded grimly. "I'll ride out after breakfast and assess the damage." "I'm coming with you," Willow said, her tone brooking no argument. "It's still my ranch." He wanted to object. Fence repair was hard work, and tracking wolves was dangerous, but the determined set of her jaw told him it would be futile. They rode out together as the sun climbed higher, Willow leading the way on a spirited chestnut mare. She rode astride in split skirts, practical for ranch work, her blonde hair braided and tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. The morning light caught the golden strands that had escaped, creating a halo effect that Elijah tried not to notice. "My father started with nothing," she explained as they rode. "Built this place 1 acre at a time. Said I was too stubborn to marry well, so he made sure I knew how to run a ranch instead." "He sounds like a wise man." "He was," she said softly, "difficult sometimes but wise." She glanced at Elijah. "What brought you to Montana originally?" The question came so naturally that Elijah answered before his defenses could rise. "Land, freedom, the usual dreams that drive men west." "And what took you from there?" He stiffened, and she must have noticed, for she quickly added, "You need not answer. We all have parts of our stories we prefer not to tell." They rode in silence until they reached the damaged fence line. The scene told its own story: broken posts, scattered boards, and the remains of the calf nearby. "3 wolves by the tracks," Elijah noted, kneeling to study the prints in the mud. "Big ones." Willow's face was grim. "They're getting bolder. Last winter they came right up to the barn." They spent the morning replacing posts and stretching new wire. Willow worked alongside him without complaint, handling tools with practiced ease. By midday they had restored the fence and buried what remained of the calf. As they ate a simple lunch of jerky and cornbread, sitting on a fallen log, Elijah found himself studying Willow. Despite her slender frame, she had worked tirelessly, revealing a strength that belied her appearance. There was something almost ethereal about her against the backdrop of the rugged landscape, like a wildflower that had somehow taken root in rocky soil. "What are you staring at, Mr. Irving?" she asked without looking up from her meal. "Caught," Elijah cleared his throat. "Just thinking you work harder than most men I've known." "Necessity," she replied with a small shrug. "When there's no one else to do the work, you do it yourself or you lose everything." She finally met his gaze. "I imagine you understand that." He did all too well. "Your father would be proud." Something flickered in her eyes, gratitude perhaps, or relief at being understood. "Sometimes I think I feel him watching," she admitted quietly. "Especially in the evenings when the light hits the mountains just so, like he's making sure I'm all right." The confession hung between them, unexpectedly intimate. Elijah said nothing, but he didn't look away. "You must think that's foolish," she added with a self-conscious laugh. "No," he said honestly, "I don't." The days fell into a rhythm as October gave way to November. Each morning they worked side by side, mending fences, tending cattle, preparing for the harsh Montana winter. Each evening they shared supper in the warm kitchen, their conversations gradually expanding beyond the day's tasks. Elijah learned that Willow had been engaged once, to a man who had promised to help run the ranch but who had fled at the first heavy snowfall, declaring the frontier too harsh for his liking. He had returned east without a backward glance, leaving Willow with new wariness about men's promises. "It was for the best," she said matter-of-factly one evening as she kneaded bread dough. "Better to learn a man's true character before marriage than after." Elijah found himself sharing small pieces of his own past in return, stories of his childhood in Tennessee, his journey west, the early years building his ranch in Montana. He carefully avoided mention of the fire, of his losses, of the nightmares that still sometimes woke him in the darkness. As November deepened, so did the cold. The first real snow arrived, blanketing the world in pristine white. They had finished the essential preparations: hay stored, livestock secured, wood stacked high against the cabin and house. It was during the first blizzard, with wind howling around the eaves of the house, that something shifted between them. Trapped indoors by the storm, they sat before the fireplace after supper, Willow mending a shirt while Elijah cleaned his revolver. "Do you believe in ghosts, Elijah?" she asked suddenly, her needle pausing mid-stitch. The question startled him. "Can't say I've given it much thought. The townspeople talk about me, you know," she continued, eyes on her needlework. "They call me the ghost widow, though I was never married. They think it's strange, a young woman alone on this ranch, visiting the graveyard each evening." "People talk when they have nothing better to do," Elijah replied carefully. "Some say I'm haunted, perhaps they're right." She set aside her mending. "My mother, father, and younger brother all lie in that hillside cemetery. Some days, I feel as if I am merely waiting to join them." The frank admission sent a chill through Elijah that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "Is that why you go there each evening, because you feel drawn to them?" "I go because I want them to know they are not forgotten," she answered softly. "That someone still tends their graves, still speaks their names." Her eyes met his across the fire's glow. "Do you not have graves you wish you could visit?" The question pierced him like a physical blow. "There were no graves," he said hoarsely, the words escaping before he could stop them. "The fire took everything." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Montana," she whispered, "the fire in Montana took your ranch." "And everything in it," he confirmed, his hands stilling on the revolver. 5 years of work, every possession, every memory." "But not family?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "I was alone, always have been, but it was still." "Everything." Willow rose and crossed to where he sat, settling beside him on the sofa. Her hand covered his, warm and sure. "Then you understand what it is to lose your world and still walk among the living." Her touch anchored him as memories threatened to overwhelm. The choking smoke, the desperate attempts to save anything from the flames, the hollow emptiness afterward. "Sometimes I think we are both ghosts," she continued softly, "moving through this world but not truly of it anymore, haunting our own lives." The insight struck uncomfortably close to truth. Elijah had been drifting since the fire, present in body but absent in spirit. And Willow, radiant, determined Willow, moved between her duties and the graveyard with the same divided existence. "Perhaps," he admitted. "But you're fighting to stay, Willow. This ranch, your determination to keep it, that's living, not haunting." She smiled faintly. "As are you. Each fence post you set, each roof beam you repair, those are acts of the living, Elijah." They sat in silence as the fire crackled and the storm raged outside, their hands still joined, two souls recognizing in each other what they could not see in themselves. That night, as Elijah made his way through knee-deep snow back to his cabin, he felt a peculiar lightness in his chest. For the first time since the fire, he had spoken of his loss aloud. For the first time, someone had truly seen him, not just the capable ranch hand, but the man adrift beneath the surface. December arrived with bitter cold and brilliant starlit nights. Despite the harsh weather, the ranch operated smoothly under their shared efforts. The cattle were healthy, the buildings secure, and preparations for spring breeding already underway. Each day, Elijah found reasons to linger in the main house, a broken chair that needed mending, a shelf to be built, stories to share over evening coffee. Each night, he watched from his cabin window as Willow made her faithful journey to the hillside graves, lanterns swinging gently in the darkness. One evening, after a particularly challenging day clearing snow from the barn roof, Elijah was too exhausted to return to his cabin immediately after supper. He dozed in the armchair by the fire while Willow played softly on the small piano in the corner, a haunting melody that seemed to bridge the worlds of the living and the dead. He woke to find her standing before him, a woolen shawl draped over her arm. "Come with me," she said simply. Without question, he rose and followed her into the crystal-clear night. The moon illuminated their path to the small cemetery, their breath clouding before them in the frigid air. The 3 wooden crosses stood sentinel against the star-filled sky. Willow placed her lantern between them and knelt in the snow, motioning for Elijah to join her. "I want to introduce you," she said softly. "This is my mother, Elizabeth." She taught me to bake bread and to stand my ground. Her hand touched the leftmost cross. My brother Samuel, he was only 14 when pneumonia took him, her voice caught slightly, and my father Thomas. Stubborn, proud, loving in his own way. Elijah knelt beside her, hat in hand, struck by the simple dignity of her ritual. They would have liked you, she continued, father especially. He valued competence above all else. I would have been honored to know them, Elijah replied truthfully. Willow turned to face him fully, moonlight silvering her features. Your ghosts have no graves to visit. But perhaps you could remember them here, with mine. The offer staggered him. This sacred space, her connection to her lost family, open to include his unnamed losses. He faltered, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Speak their names, Elijah, she encouraged gently. Or if not their names, speak what they meant to you. Let them be remembered here. And so, beneath the vast Montana sky, Elijah Irving spoke aloud the things he had kept locked away. Not of people, for there had been none close enough to mourn, but of dreams. The home he had built beam by beam, the future he had imagined, the sense of belonging he had created from nothing and lost in an afternoon. As he spoke, Willow's hand found his, their fingers intertwining in the cold. When words finally failed him, they sat in silence, connected by shared understanding of what it meant to continue when all seemed lost. Thank you, he whispered finally. She squeezed his hand. We keep them alive by remembering, and in remembering them, perhaps we remember how to live ourselves. Walking back to the house, neither pulled away from the other. Their linked hands formed a bridge, between past and present, between grief and healing, between two souls who recognized in each other a kindred resilience. At the porch steps, Willow paused. It's too cold for you to return to the cabin tonight, she said practically. The spare room is prepared. The invitation, innocent yet intimate, hung between them. Elijah knew he should refuse, maintain the boundaries that kept his heart protected, his future unencumbered. Yet the thought of returning to his cold, empty cabin after what they had shared was suddenly unbearable. Thank you, he said again, and followed her inside. Christmas approached, bringing with it a rare softening to the harsh frontier existence. Willow decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, filled the kitchen with the scents of gingerbread and cider. Elijah contributed by crafting small wooden ornaments for the modest tree they had cut from the nearby forest. Their evening visits to the gravesite continued, now a shared ritual. Sometimes they spoke to the departed, sometimes to each other, and sometimes they simply stood in companionable silence beneath the stars. Elijah found himself smiling more, laughing at small things, planning improvements to the ranch that would take months to complete. The realization that he was thinking beyond winter, beyond his promised departure in spring, both alarmed and exhilarated him. 3 days before Christmas, disaster struck. Willow's prized bull broke through ice on the creek, injured itself severely, and had to be put down. The loss was significant. The bull had been central to their spring breeding plans and represented a substantial financial investment. Elijah found Willow in the barn afterward, sitting on a hay bale, her face drawn with worry. We can recover from this, he assured her, settling beside her. The yearling shows promise. With proper training. It's not just the bull, she interrupted, her voice strained. The bank note is coming due after New Year's. I had counted on selling 3 of his calves to make the payment. Elijah frowned. How much is needed? $200, she admitted reluctantly. Father took a loan last year to expand the herd. I've been working to pay it down, but the sum was substantial. And if it's not paid? 3 months grace, then foreclosure. Her hands twisted in her lap. I could lose everything. The words echoed his own losses, making his chest tighten painfully. The thought of Willow forced from her home, her parents' graves left untended, the life she had fought to maintain scattered to the wind, it was unbearable. That won't happen, he said firmly. She looked up, startled by his vehemence. Elijah, I don't expect. I have savings, he continued. Not much, but combined with what you have, perhaps enough to make the payment. I cannot accept your money, she protested. You've worked hard for it. You'll need it when you move on in spring. The reminder of his planned departure struck him like a physical blow. He had spoken without thinking, driven by instinct to protect what they had built together over these months. It's an investment, he said carefully. In the ranch, Willow studied his face, her blue eyes searching. An investment suggests future returns. You told me you wouldn't stay beyond winter. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken questions. Elijah found himself at a crossroads, retreat into the safety of his original plan or acknowledge that something had fundamentally changed since his arrival at Whispering Pines. Plans can change, he said softly. Hope flickered across her features before she controlled it. I wouldn't hold you to anything said in a moment of crisis, Elijah. It's not about the crisis. He reached for her hand, needing her to understand. It's about what's been building between us since that first blizzard, maybe before. Willow's fingers tightened around his. I learned the hard way not to trust promises made on this frontier. I'm not asking you to trust promises, Elijah replied. Just to accept help from someone who cares what happens to you, to this ranch, to our work here. Our work, the words hung between them, significant in their implication of shared future. After a long moment, Willow nodded. As a loan, then, to be repaid when the spring calves are sold. Relief flooded through him. As a loan, he agreed, though in his heart, he had already given more than money to this woman and her struggling ranch. He had given parts of himself he'd thought lost forever in the Montana fire. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow and a breathtaking sunset that painted the western sky in shades of crimson and gold. After completing the evening chores, Elijah returned to his cabin to change before joining Willow for their holiday supper. A small package waited on his bed, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a simple red ribbon. Inside, he found a handsome leather wallet, his initials burned into the corner with careful precision. I noticed yours was falling apart, Willow explained when he thanked her later, a blush coloring her cheeks. It's not much, but... It's perfect, he interrupted, genuinely touched. It had been years since anyone had given him a Christmas gift, but I'm afraid my gift for you isn't ready yet. You've given enough, she assured him, gesturing to the festive table she had prepared. A roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and an apple pie for dessert, a feast by frontier standards. They ate by candlelight, sharing stories of Christmases past. For the first time, Elijah found himself able to recall happy memories without the sharp sting of loss that usually accompanied them. When he described his mother's plum pudding or his father's habit of singing off-key carols, he felt warmth rather than pain. After dinner, they sat before the fire, content in each other's company as snow fell gently outside. When the mantel clock struck 9, Willow rose to fetch her shawl for their nightly visit to the cemetery. Wait, Elijah said, touching her arm, there's something I want to show you first. Curious, she followed him outside and around to the back of the house, where a small workshop had been set up in a lean-to. Inside, illuminated by a lantern, stood a wooden cradle, its surface sanded smooth and carved with delicate patterns of leaves and vines. Elijah, Willow breathed, stepping forward to run her fingers over the craftsmanship. I found the wood in the old shed, he explained. Oak solid, good for generations. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. It's beautiful, but I don't understand. He took a deep breath. When I came here, I believed the frontier had no place for permanence, for family, for love. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff edge. I was wrong. Willow stood very still, her hand resting on the cradle. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've found something here I thought was lost forever, not just a place to work or belong, but a future worth building. He stepped closer, his heart pounding. With you, if you'll have me. Elijah, she whispered, are you certain? This isn't about the bank note or pity or... This is about how I watch for you each evening, walking to those graves like a spirit between worlds. He interrupted gently. About how seeing you fight for this land made me remember what it was to have something worth fighting for. About how, somehow, you helped me find parts of myself I thought had burned away in that Montana fire. He took her hands in his. I'm not asking out of duty or convenience, Willow. I'm asking because somewhere between fixing fences and sharing grief, I fell in love with you." The words once spoken seemed to hang in the air between them, irrevocable and true. Elijah waited, hardly daring to breathe, as Willow searched his face. "The townspeople were right about one thing," she said finally, her voice barely audible above the winter wind. "I was a ghost, moving through the world without truly living in it." Her fingers tightened around his. "Until you came." "Is that a yes?" he asked, hope rising. Instead of answering, she reached up and pulled his face down to hers. Their lips met in a kiss that spoke of promise, of shared understanding, of a future neither had dared imagine months before. When they finally parted, Willow smiled, a full, radiant smile that transformed her lovely face. "Yes, Elijah Irving, that's a yes." Later that night, they made their usual journey to the hillside cemetery. This time, Elijah carried the lantern while Willow walked beside him, her hand secure in his. As they stood before the three crosses, Willow spoke with quiet certainty. "They would be happy," she said, "to know I won't face the future alone." Elijah squeezed her hand. "Neither of us will." The stars shimmered overhead, witnesses to the promises exchanged between two people who had found in each other what the harsh frontier so often denied: hope, healing, and a love strong enough to overcome loss. Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers and new calves. The banknote had been paid, the ranch was thriving, and preparations for the wedding were underway. The town of Whispering Pines had slowly accepted that the ghost widow was no longer walking alone, that the drifter who had arrived in autumn had put down roots deeper than anyone expected. On a perfect April day, with the mountains still snow-capped against a brilliant blue sky, Elijah Irving and Willow Zimmerman were married in the small white church. The entire settlement turned out to witness the union, drawn by the simple power of a love that had blossomed against all odds. "I take you, Willow, to be my wife," Elijah vowed, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to build with you, to remember with you, and to face whatever comes beside you as long as we both shall live." Willow's answering promise rang clear through the sunlit church. "I take you, Elijah, to be my husband. I promise to stand firm with you, to hope with you, and to create a future where neither of us walks alone again, as long as we both shall live." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, a shaft of sunlight broke through the stained glass, surrounding them in prismatic color. Some of the older townspeople later swore they felt a presence in that moment, as if the spirits of those who had gone before had come to witness this new beginning. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold, the newlyweds made their way to the hillside cemetery. Willow, still in her wedding dress of cream-colored silk, placed fresh wildflowers on each grave. "We wanted you to be part of this day," she said softly to the wooden crosses, "to know that your legacy continues." Elijah stood beside her, his arm around her waist. "I promise to honor them," he added, "and the home they built." As they turned to leave, Willow paused, her expression thoughtful. "I think this will be my last daily visit," she said. "Not because I'll forget, but because I think they would want me to spend my evenings building our future rather than dwelling in the past." Elijah understood completely. "We'll come on special days, birthdays, Christmas, anniversaries. And we'll bring our children someday," Willow added, her hand drifting to her still flat stomach, "to tell them about their grandparents and the legacy they inherit." Elijah's eyes widened as her meaning registered. "Willow, are you?" Her smile was radiant in the fading light. "The cradle you made will have its first occupant by winter." Joy surged through him as he gathered her close, mindful of her delicate condition. The cradle he had crafted as a symbol of hope would soon cradle their child, tangible proof of the future they were building together. As they walked hand in hand toward the ranch house, their home, Elijah reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had arrived believing himself broken beyond repair, convinced that the frontier allowed no space for love or permanence. Instead, he had found healing in the most unexpected place, with a woman who understood loss as intimately as he did, who had seemed as ghost-like as he felt, yet who had proven that life could be rebuilt from ashes. The lights of their home beckoned across the darkening landscape, warm and welcoming. Behind them, the cemetery stood peaceful under the emerging stars, the past honored but no longer binding them to grief. Elijah Irving, who had lost everything in a Montana fire, had found something greater than what had been taken, not just love, but a sense of belonging, of purpose, of continuation. In Willow, he had found not just a wife but a partner who understood that the frontier's harshness made tenderness all the more precious. "What are you thinking?" Willow asked as they reached the porch steps. Elijah looked down at their joined hands, then out at the ranch that stretched before them. The land they would work together, the home where their children would be raised, the future they would build day by day. "I'm thinking that sometimes what seems like an ending is really just the beginning of a greater story," he replied. Willow smiled and reached up to touch his face gently. "Our story," she agreed. And as they stepped across the threshold together, Elijah knew with absolute certainty that no fire, no loss, no hardship the frontier might bring could ever truly destroy what they had found in each other. A love that had healed two wounded spirits and created something enduring in a world where nothing was promised.